Hello.
Thank you very much. Just a brief bit of explanation, and thanks, actually. I'd just like to say thank you to the Explorers Club for hosting us. Thank you to my friend Richard Weiss in the audience, who you all know. He introduced me to the Explorers Club I think I became a fellow in 2000 or something. He also introduced me, though, to my future wife. So thank you, Richard, for that.
He doesn't mean he's met her yet. He's just saying, my future wife.
Yes. So for those of you that don't know, it's a BBC Radio 4 programme and also a podcast, and this is the 30th season of this. So we've been recording it since 2009. And the idea, as you'll see, is it's supposed to be a relatively free-form chat. So the only thing that will be sort of strange to you, I think, is in the introduction, because it's obviously a podcast and a radio program, there will be a bit of an introduction to the Explorers Club. I know you don't need that, but after the first couple of minutes, then the chat will flow. So bear with us while we tell you what you already know for about 2 minutes.
Also, it's not like a lot of... Because one of the reasons we started doing it, because science programs were already... Hello, welcome to a program about science. We'll be talking very seriously all of the time and alienating as many of you as possible with this po-faced approach, whereas we like dicking about.
Technical term. How very British. Right.
Very BBC term.
Yes. So, I suppose if we're ready, because our panel are going to introduce themselves on air, as it were. So I suppose if we're ready, we can start. So we have to look to our engineer at the back. That's a thumb up.
Yeah.
Does that mean right?
Can I just say, by the way, the images we're surrounded by are quite terrifying for a reasonably light-hearted science show.
We are working under duress.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, I'm Brian Cox.
I'm Robin Ince, and this is A Gaiola Infinita do Macaco.
Very good, because that's Robin's Portuguese, because we are in Porto, Portugal, for a gathering of the Explorers Club.
That does mean infinite monkey cage, by the way. We checked with the waiter earlier, and we made sure he had a good tip, so I think I trust him. Anyway, this is a very exciting thing, because we are celebrating the Explorers Club, something which Brian is a member of, which is ridiculous as well, because any regular listeners at home will know Brian frequently gets lost going from the dressing room to the stage. So the idea that you're an explorer mixing with people who have travelled across the globe and indeed into space, and you find 100 metres difficult, I think is...
My claim is I'm an explorer of the subatomic world, where you inevitably get lost.
What a cast-iron alibi.
Anyway, the Explorers Club in New York is housed in a remarkable building celebrating exploration. The coffee tables are made from a ship that survived Pearl Harbor. The chair of the last emperor of China is in the sitting room, and there are flags carried into space by Apollo 8 and Apollo 15.
And if you've never been there as well, on the walls, the most beautiful paintings of intrepid journeys, which more often than not have had to turn to cannibalism. Really is true. It's when we were first taken around, it's like, that was an amazing journey. Unfortunately, they got caught there, and 3 of them were eaten. That was an incredible journey. They were all eaten. And it's just, he lost his nose, he ate his own toes. And I love it. It's I think, a very old-fashioned Peter Feachem, wasn't it? Feachem, who had lost his leg to frostbite, wore an overcoat made out of the skin of a polar bear that he'd killed, once dug his way out of an avalanche by realising that if he froze his own excrement, he could turn it into a pickaxe, and was married to a fashion illustrator from Vogue magazine. And if you've never seen that image, look it up. It is one of the most beautiful images of this vast one-legged man and this woman with just such incredible panache.
Why did he go to the Arctic without an axe? Why did he have to fashion one from his own Anyway.
Travel light.
Stuck.
It's a great mystery.
Well, I think in an avalanche, sometimes you do lose some of your goods, don't you? That might have been it.
Possibly also true.
Are you saying he did it deliberately? Okay, let's move on.
Today, we are asking, what are the new frontiers in the 21st century? What are the engineering challenges of exploring in extremes? And indeed, why do we need to explore at all?
We are joined by a volcanologist and I'm going to do that again because I suddenly realised we haven't confirmed which title you would most like to have, Britney. You have a choice. What would you like to be known as?
Astrobiologist.
Okay,
that right?
it was astrobiologist,
No,
oceanographer,
that's
or
deliberate.
space.
I was going to go astrobiologist.
Oh, we're going to do all of them.
space
All
mission
of them.
designer.
I mean,
Oh, okay.
She is all of them.
Oh, no, I know she, but all of
Whatever
these
works.
people are many things. We are joined by a volcanologist, an astronaut, an astrobiologist slash oceanographer slash space mission, you see? If you give me too many of the C words, I end up doing that. It's no good. Let's do it again.
Is that Richard Feynman?
No, that's not Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman I always do with a cold. I got a friend who's an artist. Anyway, so we are ADHD, but I only found out 2.5 years ago. But for 30 years, audiences have been telling me every single night. So we are joined by a volcanologist, an astronaut, an astrobiologist slash oceanographer slash space mission designer, and a treasure hunter. And they are...
I am Jess Phoenix. I do volcanology, and I'm the science ambassador for the Union of Concerned Scientists. I also do concerns, clearly. And I would most like to explore volcanoes on Venus, but that is going to require some of y'all to figure out how we get there and live.
Mike Massimino, former NASA astronaut. Currently, I am a professor of engineering at Columbia University. And the place if I was given any place I could go explore, I'd like to go to the moon. That's what inspired me as a little kid, as a 6-year-old, watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin there. And now we have I think a very good chance of getting people back there, hopefully in the near future. I would love to be a part of that. But I'll be watching, I think, this time again. But that's where I would love to go.
I'm Britney Schmidt, Cornell University, and I study ice anywhere we can find it, which brings me to where I would most like to explore, with all due respect to Europa, which I'm sure I'll talk about quite a lot. I'd like to go to Triton. That's my actual favorite place in the solar system.
Well, I'm Anneka Rice. I'm a broadcaster and an adventurer. And I think most of all, I'd like to have all my career again, flying around the world in a helicopter without doors. That bit is fine, but I don't want Kenneth Kendall shouting at me, "Hurry up!" I just want to do it in my own time and enjoy it. And also, Jess, I want to go bareback with you across Mongolia. Because I know you've done that.
Oh, yes.
Can I come with you next time?
Yes, we can plan a date.
That's a hell of a date.
So rare you hear about a date in Mongolia, so well done for organising that.
So soon into the programme.
It's only the
Dating.
finest alcoholic mare's milk that they have on offer.
Alcoholic mares, but does it come out alcoholic?
No,
That's a genius
no.
piece of genetic engineering.
It's not good to drink until you've let it get warm and ferment. And then, only then, can you experience the joy of drinking horse milk.
Welcome to a special episode on the joy of enjoying horse milk. And this is our panel. Oh, and then you... Brittany, I just have to ask you quickly before we get to question number 1, which is always what happens. Triton, you didn't... So why Triton?
Because it's Europa, but with Titan frozen out on top, and it came from the Kuiper Belt, and now it's stuck somewhere it didn't want to be in the first place. Seems like we should go check it out.
That's a very strong answer. Anneka, last night, I had never known this before until we had a meal last night and found out how much you loved exploring and indeed idolised explorers. Can you tell me a little bit about in childhood when you realised that this was your passion?
From a very, very young age. So it started at a very young age. When I was little, I had an explorer's suit. It was actually a red snowsuit with fur around the collar. But I would stomp off for hours on end. And my parents never knew where I was. They weren't very interested in me anyway, to be honest. So it actually fitted in very well with the family dynamic. And I'd go off stomping around, huge adventures, 6-year-old me, off I went. And then when I was a teenager and all my fellow schoolmates, you either went David Cassidy or you went Donny Osmond. That was just the choice of the poster on your bedroom wall. I went Sir Ernest Shackleton because that man, I mean, let's have a round of applause for that great, great man. He's my complete hero. And I realised, apart from the fact that I read his book, Endurance, and I found it the most captivating, extraordinary journey of endeavour I've ever come across, it fitted in with my childhood, really, and mostly because of his kit, because I do like a very butch kind of all-in-one with a robust zip up the front, and Ernest was really doing that. But anyway, I was so enamored with him and that sense of exploring and going off into the unknown that I've really followed that through my complete adult life. I am, you know, Jeopardy is my middle name, and I love being frightened. I love being fearful. So I live my life by the importance of being earnest, basically.
What I love is that any Freudians listening to this, you've given so many clues. The bareback riding in Mongolia, my parents had no interest in me, and I do love butch wear. And that's kind of, it's building up to a very interesting picture.
Just giving you something to think about for the rest of the day.
And now you've set the bar for everyone. In your introduction, you must have a literary reference.
Oh, yes, sorry
The
about
importance
that.
of being earnest.
Yeah.
Jess, volcanoes. What made you or brought you to volcanoes?
I'm going to blame my parents a little bit because they were both FBI agents. And when they scared off my first boyfriend by putting their guns on the table and then shaking his hand after work, that was sort of like anything less than that would be boring. And so volcanoes was actually a really fortunate twist of fate, thanks to a horrible ex who brought me to Los Angeles. I studied geology, and I applied for a researcher position at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. And to their, I'm sure, unending sorrow, they said yes. And lo and behold, I set foot at the summit of Mauna Loa, the world's largest volcano, taller than Everest from its base on the seafloor to the summit. And that was it. It was done. I was walking on Earth younger than I was. And there is nothing cooler than seeing the Earth both simultaneously create and destroy itself. That was all she wrote.
Yeah,
Can I just say that was a great hold my beer moment. You all need a literary reference, and you went, I think I can up that. My parents were FBI agents. Whoa!
Yeah, and I thought you were going to say...
But Jess has got whole literary references down her arms.
Well, you do. We should ask you about this because you have T.S. Eliot on your arms. Can you explain?
Yes, I actually thought I was going to become an English professor when I went to college. And clearly that did not work out. However, I still love T.S. Eliot. And if you ask anyone who went to high school with me, oh yeah, Jess, the one who was walking around reciting the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock in the hallways. That's how you know you're cool, okay? I was really cool in high school.
And do you have, what's the quote? It's, we will not cease from exploration. This is an Eliot quote, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Everything Eliot does is great, and it's all, he's very into, we shall not cease to be explorers. And, you know, I mean, it's all just, don't ruin my talk for later in the week.
Yeah. And what is it? And the end of all our exploring will be to return
to home, and that find where we have started from. Yeah.
Yeah, know the place for the first time, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
and exactly. And my end is my beginning.
Yeah.
So yes, it's very epic, very grand, very. It's funny because he was somebody whose work showed me that we can explore our relationship to the universe while sitting down and thinking. And to me, that's just as valid a form of exploration as going to the moon, going to Triton, or going to the bottom of the ocean. And we don't know ourselves fully, even though we have a whole lifetime to figure it out.
Yeah. So Mike, we have Shackleton, FBI agents. Top that.
I don't know if I can. No, I got interested in the space program, as I said earlier, watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon. And then as I got old, I was 6 years old when that happened. Then I was about 8 years old, I figured I could never become an astronaut. It's about that time I discovered I was afraid of heights. And I wasn't much of a thrill seeker in this group especially, so I didn't really see that working out. How do you grow up to be one of these superhero astronauts like my heroes when I was a little boy? When I was a senior in college, I went to the movies and saw this movie, The Right Stuff, based on the book, literary reference by Tom Wolfe.
Very good, well done, thank God.
There you go. So, but I saw the movie, read the book, and it had me thinking again. At that time, I was graduating college. What do I want to do? And I decided I didn't know if I could ever become an astronaut. I had no preconception that was ever possible. I still didn't think I could ever do that, but I thought at least I could be a part of the program. So I went to grad school and started applying. It took me a few tries. I was rejected 3 times and got in on my 4th try.
And when did you learn how to fly?
When I learned how to fly? Well, I am not a military professional pilot. I went in the academic route. I got a PhD in engineering. That's how I went. But I did learn how to fly airplanes, private pilot, is what my flying experience was. And once you get to NASA, then they teach you all kinds of stuff: how to spacewalk, how to work on the space shuttle, space station. I was a co-pilot in a T-38. Got to fly with that guy right there a few times, Mike Lopez Alegria, one of my colleagues. So they train you. They look for a vast variety of backgrounds, and then they get you ready to do the job to fly in space.
What I love about that, because I've often found with American and Canadian astronauts, the answer to that question about why is like Chris Hadfield in his book talks about, seeing them for the first moon landing, and then every day going to school going, what can I do to maximize the chance that I might be an astronaut? And the two UK astronauts, Helen Sharman and Tim Peake, if you ask them, they both say, I saw an advert and I thought, I'll have a go at that.
Yeah.
And I think, it's that big difference.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't really think much about it, which I think was a good thing until I got out of college, because I wasn't making decisions as a young person of what I was going to do for a certain career. I was just kind of enjoying what I was doing in school, my activities, and I picked out my major in college based on what I thought was interesting. And I think that was an advantage. If I was like, I had heard those stories before, people knew right away. I mean, I knew I had an interest, but since I thought it was impossible, I really didn't pay much attention to it. But some of these other folks where they did I don't know what would have happened. I think it's better to follow what you're interested in. And especially with the astronaut job, at least the NASA program and the other government agencies, they're pretty much looking for a variety of people. So there's no one path.
And are you still afraid of heights?
I don't like them, no. I do not like heights. I try to avoid them. But really, I've had a conversation with Reed Wiseman, one of our colleagues. We were talking about this. And a lot of people don't like heights. Really what it is we're afraid of gravity. So I'm okay as long as I'm in an aircraft or a spaceship or I'm spacewalking or whatever it might be. I have no problem there. It's gravity. That's what I'm afraid of. So if I've got something to protect me from that, then I'm all right.
It's always keeping you down, right?
Yeah, there you go.
And Brittany, you had the longest job description of the panel. How did that come about?
Well, because I pretty much have always just followed what I found interesting, which, as it turns out, is everything. So it's a bit hard to choose. I got into science kind of on accident. I also was an Elliott fan. I was a writer, and actually I was kind of thinking about, I started off in English and broadcasting, and I was really interested in music and journalism and that kind of stuff. I think of musicians, at least, I really like heavy metal, so musicians were kind of like the modern poets to me. And so that's what I thought I was going to do. And then I had an identity crisis in college and went, I have no idea what I'm doing here, and why am I here, and what am I going to do? And so I took a class in everything to see maybe what else would be out there. And if not, I was just going to move to Chicago and like write about bands. So I had this amazing experience of taking a class which taught me really what Europa was, which became the thing I wanted to do, right? I had an amazing professor who really knew how to explain things, and when he talked about Europa, about this alien ocean, far from us, but like very much like our own planet, I was like, what are we doing with our lives, people in the audience? Like, what are we doing? Let's all change our majors and do this. And I was the one that did that, but it was really fun. And so that's kind of it. It's like been piecing the whole bit together and all the pieces you need to understand in order to think about it. So it's just kind of a natural evolution, I suppose.
So in a way, your life has been focused on getting to Europa. That was the inspiration, your career choice.
Yeah, I don't know why water on this planet wasn't the starting place, but I guess it kind of was. Like as a kid, I was more interested in the ocean. I was very disappointed when I found out that submarines didn't have windows, because I really was inspired by, Jules Verne and those ideas, and I thought we should be able to see all of these things. And so, so I was a very sad person when I found out as a very small child that there were no windows on the submarines.
I have to ask you. Oh, sorry, no, go on.
I was just going to say, just for people listening that don't know, maybe you could just give us the 1-minute description of Europa.
Yeah, so Europa is the innermost icy moon of Jupiter, and it's kind of being pulled apart by tides. And because of that, it has about 100-kilometer ice plus ocean layer on the outside. So it's the most Earth-like place in a lot of ways. So 4 billion years of evolution of the solar system has led to this ocean and contact with the rock, and it just makes it a place that I can't imagine not going to at some point.
See, whereas I wanted to know, Metallica or Judas Priest?
Porque no los dos.
So this is what, in fact, if you, sorry, I've got a very, but I was thinking, I've always loved the different pieces of music the different astronauts have taken up when they've gone to, ISS and other places. So what's your number one song then that you're taking?
Ooh, honestly, it'd probably be Kashmir. But I
very good choice.
But the Metallica thing is real. That was like a band that changed my life. And Harvester of Sorrow, a really light piece. Would probably be actually the
Kashmir. We've still not seen. We've seen making burritos in space. We've seen crying in space. We've seen brushing teeth in space. We haven't seen headbanging in space. And I feel you should be elevated immediately for the next mission, because this is what we need to find out more about.
This is the perfect place for headbanging. I mean, the hair's going everywhere anyway. So just
And
imagine
it'll be safe for you, Mike. There's no way. Even if you're moshing, no one's going to drop you. You're going to still float. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, you can have a lot. Actually, dancing and moving around is kind of fun. You could really enjoy that, I would think. But what I found was that like the scene out of the window, looking at the planet, and I listened to a lot of music while doing that, and there was certain music that went with the scene. Like Coldplay, U2, Radiohead was awesome to listen to. Sting, a lot of motion picture soundtracks. These big kind of music scores. But stuff kind of surprised me. Like I like Bruce Springsteen, but he didn't really go well with the scene out the window. So it really had it. I felt you'd match, night with some nighttime music that went better with things, or being over the ocean. So for me, it was like trying to match the music that would allow you to enjoy. Kind of like building your own soundtrack for what you were experiencing looking out the window.
How different is it being inside the spacecraft and being outside? Because you've got a very lot, was it 35 hours spacewalk or something?
Yeah, possibly.
A huge number of hours outside.
Yeah.
What's
I'm looking
the
at Mike Lopez Alegrio. I think how much do you have, Mike? He's got 67.
67.
So he's got more than anybody, I think, American. Yeah.
Isn't that right? Any other room, you would have won that
Yeah,
competition.
he's sitting right there. Maybe you want me to trade seats with him? Mike, get up here. I'll go back.
Can I just ask how you all get into the Explorers Club? Now we've had a fellow explorer in the audience.
You apply.
Sort of cutting in there with
advanced.
You apply.
You apply.
Yeah. Oh,
We
is
can
there
give
a
you the
waiting
form.
list? Is it like the Garrett Club or the Golf Club, or how does it work?
Need a couple recommendations, but we can take care of that.
So you're not waiting for one to go before?
No.
No.
Good. No, I just want just intrigued.
But the difference, inside the spaceship is kind of cool. You're looking at but you're looking through the first thing you want to do is take a look at the planet and what else you can see when you get to space. So you unstrap, float up to a window, and look, and it's extraordinary, and it's the most beautiful thing you've seen. But you're kind of observing it from through the window. You're restricted. That view is restricted. You're kind of wearing regular clothes. If you want to go to the bathroom, you can. It's like you kind of inside it. To me, it was like looking at the aquarium. Look at the pretty fish through the window of an aquarium. But when you go outside, the whole universe opens up to you, and now you're more like a scuba diver. I feel like a real spaceman. I'm interacting with that environment, and I can look wherever I want, and the whole sky opens up to you. And the Earth, you can see the curve of the Earth from where we were up at Hubble, and it's just extraordinary. The Earth is the most compelling thing, but the experience of being out there and interacting with that environment, and you realize that you and your buddy are the only two people we know that are outside in the universe. Or maybe someone somewhere else that we don't know. But at least from what we know around our planet, we're the only two people out there, which is kind of cool. So it's the coolest thing I've done. I think it's the most extraordinary thing that astronauts can do. I know other people have done some pretty cool things in this room too.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about planning expeditions, and we'll come back to planning a spacewalk. But I thought, Jess, if you can give us a sense, so you've visited a lot of volcanoes. They're dangerous and difficult places in many
Dangerous
ways.
thing, someone's at the back's going to go, actually, I've visited 7 more. Oh,
So could you take us through, maybe you have a story about the most interesting expedition, but could you just take us through very briefly how you set up an expedition, what you do to keep safe?
Well, I can tell you what not to do off the bat, which is do not do your PhD research in Sinaloa, Mexico, when the cartels are like at an all-time high of violence.
It's always the humans, it's not the volcano
It's
or the
not the
geology.
volcanoes, no. And also don't take your newlywed husband with you and tell him that that's your honeymoon. Because that's what I did. And I ended up actually having to chase narco-traffickers in our rented Jeep because they stole my rock hammer. And, my Spanish is serviceable, But I never thought that I would be literally driving after Carlos was driving, I was passengering, and going, we have to get this rock hammer or I can't do my research. So you have to have the fundamental ingredients that you need, and it would take weeks to get a rock hammer that, to this location. So part of planning is thinking, okay, what are the things I absolutely need to accomplish? What are the things that would be nice to accomplish? What are the things that the people who are funding this would really like me to accomplish, but probably won't get? And then you try to keep everybody safe. And with volcanoes in particular, you can joke, like I joke all the time. Like I'm the most irreverent person, especially when we're in the field. But as I tell my students and people I lead on expeditions, you have to be 100% focused on safety because none of it matters if you don't come home alive. And hopefully in one piece, although, you can leave bits of skin and things. But no, the volcanoes to me are, they're dangerous, but it's an acceptable risk because from what is written in the rock record, what the volcano is capable of. If you have that part of the rock record still.
I think that movie's going to... I see Angelina Jolie and Liam Neeson, and I see the tagline, they took her rock hammer, she's going to take their lives. Something like that.
Oh, yeah?
And we'll actually have The Rock playing the rock hammer as well.
The Rock actually retweeted me before because I made a geology reference and he liked it. And so now I'm like, I'm friends with The Rock. Yeah, no, I'm not.
Who was it you were chasing, though? You were chasing
Narco-traffickers.
Like bad guys?
Like actual bad guys with guns. Like,
For a hammer.
So what happened was, yes,
It's an
Call
insight.
one of us, we'll get you a hammer.
it's a special hammer, okay? It came with me on this trip. It's in my hotel room.
It's an insight into the character of all geologists, isn't it?
We're insane.
It's the rock hammer.
Yes, the rock hammer is a key and fundamental part of our personality. It is an extension of myself and probably everyone's selves as geologists. And mine is very important. I've used it to, in lieu of horseshoes when bored at campsites, we've chucked them quite far into hay bales. You can bang bent rims on a car back into place with them. Basically, it's a fix-it tool. I've hung pictures with mine. I've sampled poop in the field, not human poop, animal poop. But basically, I had set the hammer down. I was writing notes. I had one arm. I had just gone through surgery. We were in Sinaloa, just me and my new husband, Carlos, who was in the audience, bless his soul. And Carlos was doing the heavy lifting. He had the sledgehammer, which he broke, by the way. That's when you know, as a geologist, you marry the right person. If they can break a sledgehammer, because they are so enthusiastic about your work. But basically, it ended up that I set the hammer down, writing notes, a big Dodge Durango, white, spinning rims, two dudes with aviator sunglasses and popped collars. Everything is blinged out on this car, and we are basically 50 miles from any form of traffic control, stoplight, stop sign, no, didn't exist. This was a dirt road in the mountains, and these guys didn't belong there. And so we got in the Jeep real quick, and they kind of drove by, gave us the side eye. We turned around a minute later, and I said, I want to go sample over here. And I went, where's the rock hammer? Carlos is like, well, you had it. And I said, I have one hand. I didn't have it. And I said, we got to go get it. So like a great husband, he floors the Jeep. And we caught up to the guys, and I know they had guns. The windows were very tinted, but I just said, hola, soy geóloga, necesito mi martillo, por favor. And they kind of went, okay, she's crazy. And they slowly produced the hammer and said, this one? And I went, yes. And then I'm studying volcanoes, and that is how you scare narcos. You say, yes, I study volcanoes. And they go, are we safe? And then I go, my, how the tables have turned. Oh, yes, these volcanoes aren't going to erupt anytime soon, but they've erupted before. I'm just trying to keep us all safe. And they then thanked me and went on their merry way. So that is how you deal with the human element.
So, Anneka,
Yes.
sorry, Brian. No, I was going to say, Anneka, so on the evidence so far, the idea that insanity is quite important to be an explorer.
Yeah,
Where do you
definitely.
stand on that at the moment?
I think insanity is really important, and I'm learning a lot about the panel, and I would say that I was talking earlier about fearlessness and, just absolutely embracing life, being more earnest, just going on a journey across the Antarctic where there's no need for him to go. He could have stayed at home, But he made that journey and it went a bit wrong. But then he didn't just leave his crew to perish. He got in a boat with 4 crew members and they went on an 800-mile odyssey to get help. So all the crew came back home again. I'm sorry, I'm a bit obsessed with Ernest, but what I think I'm saying is that there has to be a degree of I will try anything to be a successful explorer. And it's the sheer terror that makes it so enjoyable.
Well, you said you love terror. You said you need it in your life. So,
Yeah.
you know, for years you were doing TV shows where you were challenged to... Have there been points where you went, do you know what? This one, looking back, the answer should have been no.
Yes, caving. Now, we all have sat in this room because we're at an explorers convention, which in itself I find thrilling, just to be in a room full of explorers. But we've just seen this talk by Lee Berger, who was talking about exploring in South Africa and finding in most inaccessible places underground, you know, how many 2.9 billion-year-old rock. They went down, they squeezed through rock, they couldn't get both arms down, so one arm went and then the other one went, their head got stuck. They were going through, squeezing through presses and wedges to find bones of man, a species of man that they discovered. Now, I don't understand that. I don't know how anyone can do that. And I did it at one point in my career, and I literally cried every single day. And the crew that were with me thought they were having the time of their life because they were straight out of Vietnam War sort of photographers and a crew. And they just thought this was great, daring do, heroics. And I just was utterly traumatized. It was pitch black. We were in dry suits up to our noses in water. So no one could actually see I cried for 3 days. I had a miner's light on. And I just all the time was thinking, what is the point of this? I can sort of see with Lee Berger and his exploring team as a paleontologist, there is a point because you're finding something. But cavers just do it for fun in Britain. They just do it for fun and they go, oh, look at that geological formation and wow, that waterfall, and gasp with amazement. And I was just gasping with terror. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, they'll come to this huge open expanse and you can see the sky 400 meters up. And there's a rope there and you then have to haul yourself up this rope, your tiny little insignificant figure, to get to the top. To see grass again. Oh, I love grass. You know, I just can't tell you how I was very traumatized by that trip, and I still have nightmares about it. I still have terrible nightmares that I'm in a room and actually my children are on the other side of a wall and the walls are enclosing me and I'm being squashed.
That's another one for Freud there.
So I have done, but that's the flip side to that. I have done the most extraordinary, glorious, like helicopter trips to the Arctic, not the Antarctic like Ernest, but, you know, in the spirit of Ernest, I went north instead. And I was with scientists, and we went tracking volcanoes. We went tracking polar bears.
They're
very
moving?
Similar. We went tracking polar bears, and then we would dart them from the helicopter, and then land and tag them. And you know, there's moments like that where life is so thrilling, and it's not quite the perspective that you will have, Mike, being on the moon. Not at all. But it has always given me perspective, doing all these big projects I've done as well, that you are just a little cog. And I think it's Maya Angelou said, didn't she? If you want to live, leave a legacy, make a mark on the world that can't be erased. And that's basically what everyone in this room is doing. It's awesome.
Yeah, Brittany, for you, so the expeditions that you meant, you said ice is your professional fascination, at least. So could you talk us through some of the expeditions you've done and why you go to the Antarctic?
Yeah, for sure. I'm so glad that you mentioned endurance because that story is incredible. And I think there's lots of hero worship that happens in exploration, but I really think Shackleton is this fantastic example of how not to forget that the point is also to be human and to keep people and take care of people
Yeah.
while you're there. And so this is actually a huge part, and I think it's what makes exploration of Antarctica and other places so amazing, actually, is the first time you go there, you're overwhelmed by the place, but very soon after, you find out that it's the people you're with that are maybe even more amazing. And so seeing them have an opportunity to be exceptional, I think, is my favorite part. But we go to Antarctica for a couple of reasons. I started going because like this bizarre obsession that I have with Europa and the search for life and where do we go for that. And it took me from Tucson, where there's, as you know, lots and lots of ice, to Tucson, Arizona, by the way. So very, very hot, the exact opposite of Antarctica, down to doing this. And I was working with Earth scientists who were doing ice-penetrating radar. So it's kind of like taking an X-ray of the ice. It does for glaciers, for Antarctica, for the Arctic, and hopefully soon for Europa, what seismology does for the inside of the Earth, or what X-rays do for our body, or MRIs. And so you can kind of see through the ice and see what's going on. But I got really interested in what's happening underneath it and its interactions with the ocean. And so there we get back to submarines. And mine needed to have windows, these are cameras, but so we bring underwater vehicles and try to get them into terrible places where they like to get tangled and where it's difficult to get them, but so we try to kill robots for a living, basically. But it's a really fun and different way to see this planet, kind of at the bottom and then the upside down version. So we look at the bottom side of Antarctica with these technologies. It's really fun.
Can I ask you about your kit?
Oh yeah, it's
you
exactly the
must be
suit you were talking about earlier.
Oh gosh, you've got the suit. How you see, I'm finding that very sexy already. We've only just met.
This is the first time that anyone's ever talked about Big Red, which is what we call the giant coats we wear, as
They're
sexy.
marvelous. No, they're marvelous.
I usually call it body by punch.
But I was in the North Pole just for a very short amount of time, and I got such terrible frostbite on 2 fingers that I've never felt them since. And I just wondered if you had any cold, extreme horror stories.
Luckily not horror stories, because it goes back to this whole planning for where you're going and taking care of people. One of the first things that we do is to take the people out into the environment with all of the equipment. We look at the equipment before we're even there. And then we go out and kind of get to experience it. And one of the things we always try to do is have someone on the team that is there, or at least at the time, is assigned with watching everything else, not doing the robots, not working on the ice, where there's at least one person who can have their head in the game. Because when something breaks, you want to grab the closest wrench and deal with it, but that wrench is sitting out at minus 35, and you haven't put your glove on first. So those are the kinds of things that we kind of build up to.
Do we call that health and safety nowadays?
For sure, for sure. We talk about slips, trips, and falls, right? These little tiny things that happen in our daily lives that are also the things that will get you down there. So in terms of kit, we've got specialized gloves. We bring lots and lots of extra stuff. I have a whole bag that I always have of just extra things in case people don't have them. And then you really practice how to use them, and you get better over time. But really, it's very, very team oriented. So one of the tools that you have to survive the cold, is your teammates. So we work really hard on that.
Jess, I wanted to know a little bit more about you've mapped volcanoes, and obviously I presume there's a huge variety. So we're going to remove the drug cartel element and the problems there. But in terms of just say you're mapping an active volcano, what is the plan for that? What is the starting point, and how do you then put together that whole picture?
It sort of depends on the purpose of the map, right? If it's a hazard map, that's because there are active lava flows or active projectiles or an ash cloud that's threatening somebody or something of, I would say, importance. That's not quite the right word. Maybe of value. There we go. Human termed value. However, we use very basic technology for a lot of what we do. You can use satellites, but nothing really beats boots on the ground when it comes to mapping lava flows, particularly ones that are changing hour to hour, day to day. So you find yourself sometimes hacking through bits of vegetation while there's a river of flowing lava next to you. And you're sitting there trying to get a GPS to take its waypoint every 3 seconds so that you can then go back and brief the team, which then talks to the media and says, okay, these 7 houses are in danger. So we did a lot of that in Hawaii, particularly whenever there is an active flow eruption. But also, you can do it on volcanoes that aren't erupting. So I was part of the Mauna Loa mapping project, and that was an effort to try to understand this behemoth of a volcano that has built up over about 1 million years, is what was exposed on the surface. And my boss there, Frank Truesdell, at the U.S. Geological Survey's Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, that man can look at a lava flow from 50 meters and go, oh yeah, that was the 1838. And then look at another one, oh yeah, that was 1722. And you're just like, how do you know this? But it's low tech, it's remarkably low tech. And the hazard maps are more complex when you get the more potentially explosive style of eruptive volcanoes. So if you're looking at a Mount Etna, a Mount St. Helens, or Mount Rainier, which is quite a big hazard in the US, those are the volcanoes that they don't just do the sticky, oozy, runny lava flows that are nice to walk up and sample when they're flowing. Those are the ones that have the potential to be pretty cataclysmic for people nearby. So then we use satellites. We use these really neat things called tilt meters, which were originally designed for the military, but you can put them in the ground and they tell you on a millimeter to centimeter scale how much the ground is rising or sinking, which in volcano terms is the lava chamber, is the magma chamber inflating or deflating? Is magma entering the system and pressurizing it along with gas, or is it getting safer? So we use a lot of different instruments. We even use satellites these days that can actually give us really cool diagrams that look great for the public, and you don't have to explain too much. You just say, oh, look, that area that's magenta, that's bad. And so, we've got good graphics now, too, not just, oh, look, I drew a map here, don't go here.
Now, Mike, we talked about planning. So both your missions were Hubble servicing missions, with the Hubble Space Telescope keeping that magnificent instrument working. So could you talk us through, because I imagine that every single second of a spacewalk is planned. So is that the way it is?
It is. We plan, and then you also plan for things to change. Because, once you get out the door, every spacewalk, whether you're inside helping with the choreography and going through the checklist to help your friends outside, or if you're outside, or if you're in the control, no matter, every spacewalk, something is not exactly as you would have expected, or you might make a mistake that wasn't planned. So, but they are planned down to the second, and we would always look for ways to improve. We would train both with virtual reality and in the simulator, but it would all come together in the pool underwater. We would do underwater training in our big pool, and we would always look for ways to improve. If we could save even 1 minute of spacewalking time, that was significant. And then we would try to see what could go wrong. And sometimes we would discover that in our training. Oh, I don't know, I could break that, or I don't know, this could happen, or maybe I need this. And then you would try to imagine what could go wrong, and you'd have a plan to answer those problems. But I remember every spacewalk getting ready to go out and thinking, what's going to happen today that we didn't think about? Something's beyond your imagination, or something is not the way it's supposed to be, because you can't really practice on the actual location. You have to simulate everything and then go out there. I felt I was like training to play in the World Cup or the Super Bowl or World Series without ever being on a field. That's the way it is. You've got to perform once you get there. So you try to think of everything, try to be prepared for everything, and you practice problem solving with your team during your training, so that when the unexpected happens, even though you don't have an answer for it, you know how to engage it, because the team can go and get into action and usually get an answer quickly too, because you don't have a lot of time.
What was your most interesting moment?
My most interesting mistake?
Interesting moments. Interesting, but by interesting I mean,
just interesting
challenge.
Out there?
Yeah.
I think there were a couple things maybe. It's all during the spacewalks, which is especially on Hubble and the space station spacewalks as well. You have a plan, you have to execute. You're given a great responsibility. You don't want to mess this up. You feel like you have to do your job. Of course, that's number one. But at the same time, you're in this extraordinary location, and especially from the vantage point of a spacewalk, and you can't help but take these little looks whenever you can. And a couple things. One was just the beauty of the planet was overwhelming. On my second spacewalk, I had a chance to really enjoy that view. And the thought that went through my mind was, this is a view from heaven. It's a heavenly view. And I dwelled on it, just staring at the planet, and said, nah, it's more beautiful than that. This is what heaven must look like. And from that moment forward, I have a different opinion of where we are. I think we're in an absolute paradise. And it's very fragile as well. You look in the other direction, and I'm wearing life support. I couldn't be up there for very long. The other direction, you look out there, it's kind of cool looking out there, but we've checked out the neighborhood. We've got nowhere to go. And so I have an appreciation, I think, different than what I had previously of how beautiful this place is that we live on, that we live in, and how fragile it is.
It's so interesting you say that, because I thought it would be a good idea to everyone who is elected to run a country should be sent into space. And like I said, most of them should come back. But because,
as long as they can be good crewmates, they got to be able to get along.
But it's what you say. It's that experience. Every astronaut I've had the pleasure to speak to has said the same thing.
Yeah.
Which is you come back with a changed view of our place in the universe.
We are very lucky to be here. And I think I try to look at the beauty that is around us here, where we are in this beautiful location. You're admiring that from afar, but down here we get to engage it. And the other thing is my concept of home, of where I'm from. As a little kid, I grew up just outside of New York City, and my home was my Franklin Square, and that's where I grew up. That was my home. And then as I got older, I identified New York more as my home. And then as an astronaut, I had the American flag on my arm going to work, and I was an American, But after going around the planet and looking at it, I started thinking differently. This happened more in my second flight, where I started thinking of home as Earth, and it's a place we all share. So when I think of home, I think of planet Earth.
Home is Earth.
Yeah.
Because I remember in 1989, you were talking earlier about Helen Sharman and Tim Peake just answering ads, because there were ads literally in the British press saying, ever thought of being an astronaut? Apply. It'll change your life, or whatever. I don't know why I did a slight American accent there. But anyway, and I was actually terrified at the time, because at the time I was doing lots of adventuring. And so many people actually said to me, would you consider being part of it was the Mir space program, wasn't it? And I was absolutely terrified that somehow I'd get swept along, because I didn't think I'd be able to say no, because, it's part of my jeopardy problem that I've got. But I really was too scared I was terrified that I would have to do it, because I'd spent my whole life to that moment finding where home was myself and my own front door and everything. And then, as you say, you've had that whole idea blown apart, but it sounds like it was a very positive thing.
Well, I feel that we should mention the quote that was up earlier, because a few days before we started recording this, William Anders, or Bill Anders, died, and he was one of the first 3 people to leave the atmosphere and took that incredible image of Earthrise, which is such, and again, I think even before we start sending the politicians into space, the idea that every politician should have on their wall Earthrise, that incredible image. And I just wonder for you, Brittany, the certain images, how much of your work do you feel the importance of communicating, as Mike was saying, the rarity of this experience that we have of being on a living planet surrounded by such variety, and you're looking also further out and thinking, well, where else might we find these things?
Yeah, I really resonated with what Mike said actually about where you start thinking of home, because I have since going to Antarctica, so I just passed in the last field season over 2 years out in the field in the ice, and that's where I think of. I kind of am grounded there. We were having a conversation last night about whether you leave parts of yourself really back in places that you've been, and I feel like that. I can center myself in that place even though I'm not there. And so I think that for me is a big part of it, and it wasn't why I went down the first time, right? I went down the first time because I've got to understand Europa, and I'm obsessed with this thing. And the first time I stood on the ice and looked out, it was just overwhelming. And the way I've always described it to someone is remember the first time that you stood under the most impressive sky, right? And you felt small but significant at the same time, lucky to be feeling that way. And that's how you feel, at least I do, every time you walk out. And so when you get to talk about that, when you would talk about what your experience is, I think hopefully it becomes more accessible, more human, and more kind of grounded, because just like Mike was also saying, it's incredibly powerful. People want to ask you about the weather, they want to ask you about penguins, and really all I want to talk about is how much power it has, but how it's falling apart, and like our role in how to do that. And so if we can bring importance and intent to that, then it makes it much more important, because most people will not go spend a whole bunch of time sitting on ice, you know, trying to kill robots and trying to figure that out. But it's still a huge part of who we are, is to kind of feel a part of the planet. And so seeing it that way, when I describe Antarctica and Europa as Earth-like, because we've been there, that's actually part of it, right? It is actually very, very relative, I think, in that way.
It's very important what you say, isn't it? That exploration is not a selfish act.
It doesn't have to be. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people think it is, and we were talking about that at lunch today, actually, is that the importance of, there are going to be people who will go out and do something because it's a first, but it's not necessarily the first that matters. I think it's the seconds and the thirds and the understanding. We talked about that today too, is that it brings people in, and it opens the door to, I think, these really transformative experiences, and then stewardship and things like that.
Yeah, I want to talk about the future, actually. And actually, Jess, you said in your introduction that one of the volcanoes you would like to visit, the volcanoes, are the volcanoes of Venus, which we now know are active.
Yeah.
Right, within the last few months, I
Right.
think. So what of those other volcanoes, Olympus Mons on Mars, or the volcanoes of Io? Would you go? If you could, I mean, you can't go to Venus. I definitely guarantee you're not going to Venus, but maybe Olympus
Just
Mons.
killing my dreams, Brian.
Olympus Mons, though.
I know. Olympus Mons is cool. For reference, I know some people who listen will know this, but it is larger than the U.S. state of Missouri.
Yeah.
So
This is Mars, the largest volcano in the solar
on
system, I
Mars,
should say,
yes,
on Mars.
it is. Yeah, and I'm sure there's probably a bigger one somewhere else. But for what we know, it is the grand champion of size in volcano world. It is not active though currently. So I'm really drawn to the ones that are active, and active doesn't mean erupting. It just means that it will erupt again. So for me, I've worked on 6 continents. I've had that privilege and honor. I actually have one volcano that I have my eye on, and it is actually in your neck of the woods, Brittany. I need to go visit Mount Erebus because it has a lava lake. And my very favorite volcanoes are ones with lava lakes. And at any given moment, there's anywhere between like 7 to 8 that are active around the planet. And I believe that we're going to learn a lot about our future as a species, as a planet, as a place in the solar system, by looking at the primordial processes that formed the planet. And the fact that our planet is not a cold, dead rock. I mean, when you see it from space, it's not just a blue marble, it is an active, changing, vibrant place where there isn't just biology running around on the surface, but the very rocks themselves are constantly changing. It is dynamic. It is as far as humans can conceive of time. We're bad at that as humans, because if we're lucky, we may live to 100, if we're really, really lucky. But the Earth and the universe operate on geologic time, and you know that is billions with a B years old. So for me, I'm super excited to see the discoveries we're going to have that integrate geology and biology and atmospheric sciences, chemistry. I mean, all of this is what links us as humans, because we all share that curiosity. That why are we here? What is our relationship to each other, to the world around us? And I think if we just keep stoking that curiosity, and we recognize that we have these places here on Earth that we can go to, right? We can go to Mount Erebus. It's possible, and we can see the real complexity that we still have yet to truly fathom.
Well, that's it. Mike, I was just going to pick up on really what you were just saying there, Jess, and previously about boots on the ground as well, which is, of course, one of the debates around space exploration is some people do say, look, why do we keep needing to send humans up? Can't we just all do this with, whatever robots survive? And how do you feel, what is your answer to those who do go, surely we can just do this with technology and without humans?
I think you put humans in space because you need to. Humans can cover, right now, can cover more ground can do more things than machines can. But you know, that day may be coming where, and we find more and more that the robots can do, or certainly we can't go very far. I mean, we haven't been to the moon in over 50 years, and to go and discover the things that my friends here are looking at, you can't send anybody there right now. It's impossible. So, but I think that the more we can use technology and we can use uncrewed vehicles to go and take samples and see what's out there, the more we're going to learn. And I think there's always going to be a place for human exploration. And I think it's just how do we use it? Do we use it wisely? And the more that the technology can cover, the more that we can learn about a place without sending people, I think that's going to make the time when we do send people to these places much more efficient and safer.
There must be an element of what you said that you described so eloquently, the power of looking at the Earth from space.
Yes.
And so there must be I suppose a place for poets and artists and musicians. We talked about Mars earlier, actually, the session here at this conference about going potentially to Mars in the next 20 or 30 years. That must also be an important component.
That's harder to justify, though, right? But I think that's probably, in my mind, the most important reason to send people is that. But you can't, the robot can do this and it's safer and all this stuff. But it also, it captures our imagination. You know, the other countries have landed, the Soviet Union landed someone can check my history if I'm wrong, I'm sure in this room, but they landed a probe on the moon before the United States did. And that, you know, people might remember that, but certainly remember when a person got there, right? There was a big deal all over the world when that happened, when Neil Armstrong took those first steps. There's something about people doing things. You know, you mentioned Shackleton and how he's inspired you, and that's when people do things, we can relate to it, and it enriches our life.
Also, we see something utterly extraordinary amongst explorers when something goes wrong, like the group of boys trapped in the cave in Thailand, where those cavers, who I was sort of slightly laughing at earlier, you know, what's the point? You know, the shared expertise and knowledge of cavers around the world. You know, I was in tears watching that documentary because they were just truly extraordinary, the way they went in and found a way to bring those boys out of the cave. And that's exploration. That's humans doing it, isn't it? There's no machine that's going to go in and do that. So, I mean, I'm really bigging it up for cavers now. I've decided I love them and I want to go caving again. Okay, I'm just saying.
There'll be offers here, I'm sure, if you want to go on. Jess, in terms of the future, so Europa, as you said, this ice moon ocean world around Jupiter, could you give us the vision of what we are going to do there in the next, 20 years maybe?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it starts hopefully on October 10th. So we're launching Europa Clipper. So it's the first mission to focus on Europa. And it's going to be joined in the Jupiter system by an ESA mission called JUICE. So October 10th, we launched to Europa. And the idea is to figure out how this place works, to map the surface in detail for the first time. So when we look at Mars, you know, you could see this table or this microphone in most pictures of Mars, but on Europa, we call high resolution anything better than 300 meters per pixel. We would miss this building in most pictures, right? So how do we get there? So that's, I think, the first step, and we're going with a bunch of tools to be able to sample materials coming off of the surface, and we'll get really close and understand how deep the ice is, things like that. But eventually, we got to get in the ocean. We got to get into the ice shell. We got to melt through it, and so those are the steps that kind of start now. We're working on how does the spacecraft need to think, right? Because it's a long time delay, and then you have to go down through 30 kilometers of ice to get there. What are the science that we have to do along the way? And so as we're thinking about that, we have to teach ourselves how to explore there. And so there's that connection and why our backyard becomes so important for bending and breaking the way we think about exploration. And so our hope is that we end up sending a lander and it sits on the surface and it melts into the interior and we get to actually sample an alien ocean in that way for the first time. So I hope that's something that's in the future. We're working really hard.
And just to emphasize, 30 kilometers of ice you've got to get through.
We've got 5 on this planet. So that's also a goal, right? Is actually we haven't been to the bottom of the deepest ice. We haven't been to the deepest subglacial lakes. We haven't been to the largest subglacial lakes. So that is on our agenda, right? Is getting into these places. And because it tells us something crazy about our own planet. What's been going on down there, and how does life work at its most fundamental level? And then you're prepared to go and ask those questions when you get to a new place, because you need the right tools and you have to ask the right questions, right? It's not just, bring a microscope or bring a camera and look for fish. It's much more than that, right? So, but the journey is part of the joy, right? So building the thing, becoming weirdly emotionally attached to the technology, and then fielding it and sending it out into space.
Although it would be cool to find fish.
Oh, certainly. Oh, we're still going to send one just in case, right? Then it's nice because that picture comes back and we can all just go out for brunch and have a really relaxing day afterwards, right?
Yeah. Casual.
Jess, I just wonder, just for listeners at home, this might be useful, which is, I imagine that quite often one of the problems is actually getting the money to do these things and get finance. Are there any buzzwords or particular anecdotes that you find effective for going, excellent, finally I can go to another volcano?
When you say relation to origins of life, so you either get people excited and interested, and intrigued, or you say, if you don't help us study this, you're going to die. So you can go for wonder and joy, or you could go for terror.
Carrot and stick.
Yes, exactly. And as we've all learned, terror sells. So that is, if we can tie it to a pressing threat, that tends to get science funded a lot more quickly. I wish we could all just do it for wonder and joy and light and butterflies and unicorns, but we have to do it because lava bombs could kill your town.
Yeah, that's a great threat. Thank you. Mike, what about, NASA often has battled to get, finance for, did you feel that when you were working there, that kind of oh man, if only we could do this experiment or this particular thing, but we're still restricted, despite the enormity of the imagination involved?
Yeah, NASA's a government agency, so it's dealing with the taxpayers' dollars, right? And I always felt like NASA was given a good amount of money. It's an investment in the future. It does great things at NASA, but so do a lot of other things. You have to keep people fed and housed and all these other things. So you can't really do everything you want to do. It's a bit inefficient the way the government does business because the taxpayers' dollar is spread around the country and so on. But I think one of the things that has gone well in the last few years is the burgeoning commercial business. We have our friends from Vast here. They spoke earlier, and Axiom and other companies now are seeing some success. And I think what NASA has been about for a long time is also trying to offload the space program from just being a government-only taxpayer dollar agency to kind of fostering some commercial development. The space shuttle, at the beginning of it, at its inception, the hope was that it would be flown by commercial airline pilots and you'd travel around the world in space shuttles. And that didn't quite happen. They had an accident and that kind of ended that idea. But when the shuttle program was retired, they looked at it as an opportunity to try to help with the commercialization of space. So companies like SpaceX, and now Boeing has also launched a Starliner to the space station a couple weeks ago. So we're starting to, I think, see the benefits of it. So I think the taxpayers' dollar, fighting for that budget like you described, we wish we had this and we had that. I think the hopefulness we have now that it's not just taxpayers' dollars, it's also some very clever individuals and entrepreneurs who are inspiring lots of my students at Columbia are excited about working in the space program, not just for the government, but also working for some of these interesting companies. So that's why I have hope moving forward that we're not going to be totally dependent on taxpayer money to do these things.
Wonderful. Well, we have, we always ask an audience question on this show.
Have we run out of time already?
We have, yes.
I've got lots of other things to ask Britney as well. Oh, man.
We have an audience question, and I think the audience answer should be the most informed we've had in 30 seasons of this show. So let's see, shall we?
What was it? The question we asked them, what was it, Brian?
The audience question was, what is the most peculiar thing you've found whilst out exploring?
Right, go on then.
So, we have...
someone's already been demoted.
Yeah.
You might have noticed. No, not that one. I'm not starting with that.
No, this is one part.
You've got to read them out aloud.
India.
As a physicist, he still believes in telepathy. It's ridiculous.
So we have Indian arrow spearheads in South Texas and cave drawings.
I've got Greek
French.
Greek inscription that may prove Alexander the Great crossed the, is it Dattara Depression? On the way to Memphis to become a pharaoh.
There's one.
I love that.
You'll like that one, Anneka. You'll like that one.
Oh, am I reading? How exciting. Richard Garriott says a hand-knitted glove blowing across the ice, deep interior of the Antarctica.
So could that have been Shackleton's glove? Hand-knitted. Who knows?
Where is Richard? What do you mean a hand-knitted? What, like something your granny would make? Sort of crocheted?
If you can hear me all the way back here, it was actually a double pair of gloves made out of one strand of yarn so that you could turn one glove inside the other to make a double layered glove. And so it was obviously from explorers 50 to 100 years before we'd been there.
Yeah.
Wow, did you understand
Well,
that?
we should know as well, of course, that I do know at the Explorers Club, they do have the head of a Yeti as well. So who knows who the real knitter was? Authenticity, it hasn't got the stamp on it yet as an authentic Yeti.
Paolo here says, myself.
On a multi-day hike, I felt so tired that it brought me to find that I am pregnant. That was from Kim.
Would you like to read that one out, Jess?
All right. So we've got Carlos who said a naked man in the middle of the Mojave Desert using magneton rocks to prove it was a government conspiracy.
Fair enough.
That's
That's my husband. I was there. The naked man was legit.
Right, well, that's the main quote we're going to take out after all that. The naked man was legit.
I'm here all week, folks.
There's all sorts of things for conspiracies here. Dozens of pigeon wings, in brackets, just the wings, in an abandoned building. Just the wings.
That's creepy.
Yeah.
Or little angels. The recipe for Ginny expelling oil in Zanzibar.
Oh, I've got the most important thing was that what matters is the whole process and not the objective defined to explore. That's Nuno Diaz.
And what have you got, Mike?
This is a long one. I'll try to summarize. It's from a teenager. It's kind of cool. He says the most important thing that this person has discovered is that exploration for the human race, how important it is, and he hopes that it leads to a microgravity flight for him. His name is Pedro, and he hopes to will lead him to space with a Portuguese flag. What do you think of that?
Because we are in Portugal. We've sort of glossed over the fact we're in Portugal. I mean, that is the age of discovery, which I always remember Henry the Navigator when I was learning about the age of discovery at school, and I just thought, it's so great, isn't it, to have the adjective after your name so everyone knows immediately what he does. And I was thinking, Brian, you could be Brian the Boffin. Do you think? Would that work? Mike the mechanic, or is that something else?
Mike and the mechanic.
A space mechanic. My car I have trouble with.
But that's very helpful with Henry the Navigator because
I
everyone
think he had to
absolutely
navigate
knew.
first. I don't think he was born when you're Henry the Navigator,
No,
and thus he
earned
became
it
one.
slightly.
It was his navigation that gave him that surname.
Whereas someone like Vasco da Gama, you always thought, that just sounds like it's a problem that you would need a stent for.
But it's great. Finding a rhyme for pyjamas is very difficult for poets, as indeed we know T.S. Eliot found that very, very difficult, and so Vasco da Gama's good. As a nature recordist, one day on an expedition, I went to collect my equipment 5 kilometres away from the base. We went by walk. Suddenly, when we were back, we heard a roar. It was a female jaguar less than 50 metres distance from us. Amazing. It was at Colombian Eastern Plains. That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah. And that one was sent by Seance.
Oh, worm-like creatures underwater that would emit green bioluminescent ink as they twirled through the water that looked like the Northern Lights. Potentially a mating display, maybe undiscovered. That's fantastic. And Protoceratops in the Gobi.
Oh, wow. Glamour.
There we are. That is all we have time
It's
for.
ridiculous. We needed a lot more time. Who would have thought we couldn't have covered the whole history of exploration in 43 minutes? Nonsense.
That is all we have time for. Thank you to our panel. Jess Phoenix, Mike Massimino, Britney Schmidt, I have to say it correctly, Britney Schmidt, and Anneka Rice. Thank you. In our next show, we are asking, what is gas?
Yeah.
What is
What is gas and do we need it? I think the answer's going to be yes, but tune in to find out.
We do indeed.
Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you. Oh, I have to have one pickup, if that's all right, which is, Britney, in terms of the future, that was it.
Wait.
That's the
can
only
I-
other difference.
It's Massimino. You got to say his last name. You
Oh,
said
what did I
Massimo.
say?
You said Massimo.
I'm not sure what you said, but it's fine.
Yeah.
Oh,
Just, you know,
I'm sorry. What?
Massimino.
Massimino.
Mike Massimino.
Massimino. Sorry.
I have trouble with
Mike,
it too, Brian.
Mike Massimino. I thought I said it wrong. Mike Massimino.
Just call me Mass. That's what everyone else says.
Mass.
It's too different.
Oh, no, don't get a physicist defining you as mass.
Mass.
That leads to a whole can of worms. Hopefully we'll see some of you later. And what an absolute joy to, like, when we went to the Explorers Club 2 years ago, it was such an amazing place. And so many, you know, when you just go in and you just see these people just sitting in armchairs having coffee out of paper cups and you see what they're talking about. And it's so vibrant and wonderful. And I think everything that we've seen today is, again, it's so lovely, some of the answers people gave. So thank you very much for hosting us to do this here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
It goes fast, doesn't it? But that was flashing.
I do a podcast too, so I know.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Do you need us to... Oh, sorry.
You stay. Stay.
That's the end of the session, isn't it? I
No, we're
believe?
just getting a shot, that's all. Yeah, you're more than welcome to leave. The
Q&A.
Oh, man, there's so much.
Here I am with the official microphone to call a close to the day. So thank you all so very much. You can obviously stay there for any of the photographic needs that you have. But also thanks to all of you for being here for our opening day of GLEX, the ignition here in Portugal. We have activities for a lot of the speakers and participants, obviously for the next day or two here in Porto. And then for many, if not most of you, I hope we'll see you all again in a couple of days over in the Azores in the beautiful Terceira. We'll be back in Ajna again. So see you then.
Richard, before you go, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When you took us round, there's an amazing story, something worth looking up. The guy who was going to be shot, who demanded to be shot on the expedition, and he had to, the muskets wouldn't fire. What was and so he went and warmed the triggers of the very muskets that were then going to kill him. That is such an amazing. What was his name?
Well, first of all, the expedition was Adolphus Greely, who became the first president of the Explorers Club, and 20 out of the 26 crew that went in died in the 3 years they were stuck. That's where a lot of cannibalism apparently did occur. And one of the people who was starving and freezing over a 3-year period really wanted to die. He was suffering so badly he wanted to die. He couldn't bring himself to commit suicide. And so he did things to try to get himself punished by death. And the only thing he could do to get that punishment was stealing food. And so 3 times he stole food from others, really to get himself executed. They finally agreed to execute him. They took him out behind a hill that's in the portrait, the painting that you saw hanging in the club. 3 marksmen were out there with him to fire upon him, but the guns would not fire because they were frozen. And so he himself warmed the mechanisms of these guns with his breath, made sure they would fire. He had already written a note out to saying, please use my flesh for the rest of you to survive. And then they shot him and they ate him. Is that a true story? Richard Weiss says was whose grandfather? Christy Nome from South Dakota. It was her grandfather. Are you pulling my leg? Okay, you guys, all right.
That's the punchline to almost every explorer. And then they shot him and they ate him.
And they shot
Good
him and
night.
ate him. That's true. It's true.
Thank you so much,
you very
Richard.
much.
I like